Quinn hung up the phone, releasing a pent-up breath. She rested her back against the bathroom door, squeezing her eyes closed. Behind her, sounds of clattering dishes and overlapping voices mingled together in an overstimulating chorus. She counted to 10 before plastering on her work smile and exiting the employee's bathroom. She only had 30 minutes left in her shift. She could do it. She ran sweaty hands down her uniform and hustled into the kitchen, picking up where she left off. Her co-worker, who had graciously covered for her, gave her a concerned glance, but didn't ask any questions. Perfect timing, Quinn. Cook just finished your table's orders. Quinn only offered a thin smile, gathering the plates and heading for the table. She mentally thanked God that there were only 3 people. She served her tables with practiced ease, slipping back into her rehearsed rhythm. As she did, her thoughts wandered to the call she planned to take for the entirety of her break. But it was prolonged at least 20 minutes more than expected. She answered the call, anticipating the cold tone of her parents' voices, but not the harsh words spewed at her almost as soon as a greeting left her mouth. We're having a small gathering on our yacht this weekend, but we know you can't make it since you choose to slave away at every second of the day, so we thought we'd just tell you the news now. There was a small pause, almost as if they were considering her feelings for once. We're moving to New Mexico in a month. We need you to take your things by the end of next week, or we'll be throwing them out. Quinn visibly flinched as if a cold hand had slapped her across the face. Since she moved out nearly a year ago, her parents agreed to keep the things she couldn't fit in her small apartment. They had an agreement. They'd use her old room for storage, including her things, so she wouldn't have to pay for a storage unit. But now they were going back on their word. She tried to sound supportive. Well, congratulations. I'm so happy for you guys. The words tasted like poison even after she'd said them. Her parents gave her no indication of gratitude. We're also selling your jewelry box for a little extra cash. If she'd been slapped before, this was a full-on punch to her gut. Her mouth dried. What? You can't just sell it. Grandma? Yes, we know. Your grandma gave it to you, but she's long gone now. And clearly you want nothing to do with it since you left it behind. Quinn felt her chest simmer with anger. Before she could stop herself, she said, "She gave it to me, so it's my decision to make whether to sell it or not. Not yours. I'll come by this week and..." "You can't. We'll be out of town until Saturday. It will be sold by the time we get back." Quinn wanted to pull her hair out. She gritted her teeth. "I don't give you permission to sell it." She thought she heard her dad scoff. "We were just informing you of our decision, Quinn. You should have taken it when you had the chance." With that, the line went quiet. Quinn's heart still pounded with suppressed rage at her parents' evident disregard of her feelings. She imagined confronting them one day, finally giving them a piece of her mind after staying silent for so long, but a part of her was too exhausted to even try. She couldn't help but listen to it. When someone touched her shoulder, she jumped, finding one of her co-workers standing behind her with a look of worry in his eyes. He removed his hand just as fast. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you, Quinn. Your shift's done." He offered her a gentle smile. She forced herself to return. "Thanks, Chris," she said, making an effort to lift her tired eyes to his emerald green ones. He was fairly new to the job, but was already an important asset to the team. She usually only spoke to him on occasion, depending on how busy it was in the restaurant, and this was the most they'd talked. Chris ran a hand over the dirty blonde hair he had situated in a low ponytail. "Don't mention it. Make sure you get some rest. You look dead on your feet." When he noticed Quinn wasn't amused at his truthful joke, he awkwardly cleared his throat. I just mean, you look a bit tired. I wanted to..." "I get it." She stopped his rambling with narrowed eyes. Not wanting to come off as overly rude, she softened her voice. "I've had a long day." She considered correcting herself and saying she had a long year, but swallowed the remark. "See you on Wednesday." "Right, see you on Wednesday." Chris waved as she walked off. She clocked out and left quickly, ignoring Chris's stare at her nearly the whole time. The moment Quinn parked in front of her apartment complex, her phone rang. She read the caller ID, and a smile lifted her face. "Hey, Beck," she answered. "Hey," came her boyfriend's dry response. "Did you get my message?" She frowned at his disengaging tone. "No, I was at work, remember?" "Right, always working," he mumbled loud enough for her to hear. She bit back the snarky remark she wanted to give, settling on silence. His message consisted of the date and time of the concert of Beck's favorite band. Distaste fell over her for a few different reasons. "You didn't order the tickets yet, did you?" "No, but I'm going to," he sounded annoyed, as if he knew what she'd say next. She blew out a breath. "I'm sorry, but I can't go, Beck. I told you I'm studying for a big exam that day, remember?" He said he remembered, but she could tell he was blatantly lying. He never remembered anything about her. Sometimes she wondered why they were even together. Beck called her name, and she realized she hadn't been paying attention to whatever he said. She blinked and shook her head. "Sorry, what were you saying?" She heard a heavy and irritated sigh on the other side of the line. "I said, why don't you ditch the stupid exam and come have fun for once? You're always studying or working." "You know I can't do that." She ran a tired hand down her face. "And why not?" His tone was challenging. "Because I'm preparing for my future, Beck. I can't waste my time having fun every day like what? Me?" he accused her. When she didn't answer, he laughed bitterly. "Fine, be a nerd and turn into a loner, Quinn. But don't say I didn't try to help you." She sighed. "Beck, you know I didn't mean it like that. She trailed off when the line went silent. She dug her hands into her dark auburn curls, growling her frustration. Just then, a rainstorm crashed in like an unwanted guest. The moment she entered her cozy loft apartment, shaking water from her hair, she headed for the bathroom for a much-needed shower. She scrubbed the harsh day away, a day of college, work, and studying. On top of that, the pressure of where she would store her things once her parents moved added another burden to her shoulders. She groaned and scrubbed herself harder. She ate a quick meal of leftovers from the restaurant, studied for 30 minutes for her upcoming exam, and settled onto her couch. She rested for 15 minutes before pushing herself off the couch to grab her Bible. As she flipped through the thin pages, running slender, warm-toned fingers over the fine printed words, a calm began to settle within her. The calm only grew as she read, feeling a certain tension leave her. Her troubles faded away, leaving her with a clearer mind. She closed the Bible, got to her knees, and prayed. She wasn't sure where to start in her prayer, but didn't have to know, since the moment she thought of forming a word, she burst into tears. She cried for a long time, thinking about her compacted life, a life that continued to suck the energy from her, leaving her an empty shell performing mandatory duties and rehearsed practices. She thought about her college life and how demanding her major was. She thought about work and how she depended on each paycheck to get her to the next month, not being able to enjoy leisure like her carefree peers. She thought of her parents and their unspoken disdain towards her for reasons unknown. And lastly, she thought of Beck, the man who had changed drastically in the few years they'd been together. Where at first he'd been compassionate and kind concerning her hectic life, he became yet another problem for her to deal with. He stopped trying to understand her and started accusing her and judging her just as her parents had. She had never felt so misunderstood. She hugged her frame, feeling small. Not knowing what else to do, she stood and grabbed her second favorite book. It was a book often looked over, but she saw the beauty in it. She held the hard-covered novel to her chest, releasing a deep breath. She wasn't sure how many times she'd read it, but it was well over 10. Observing it, she wiped her index finger over the title, a warm smile coaxing her frown away. She hugged the novel again and settled on her carpeted floor, placing the book on her coffee table and opening it to the middle where she left off. Quinn wasn't sure why, but she had a soft spot for Christian fantasy novels. Like the other books she read, it gave her an escape from her reality, temporarily quieting the unbearable noise of her everyday life. She fell into a deep concentration, reading the book as if it were her first time. She read of a prince turned king due to the unfortunate death of his father. Taking on the important role came with its difficulties. and in a moment of weakness, King Henry makes an impulsive decision to open his kingdom and allow travelers in for trading purposes. The decree is made, and the gates are opened, allowing a castaway to wander into the kingdom of Sognimia. Sabrina Edmure just wants to escape her past, no matter where that leaves her. But when she stumbles into King Henry's domain, she's in for a pleasant surprise. Looking for honest work, she tries to get hired as a monk's apprentice to hone in on her God-given gift of writing. However, her work is so good, the king quickly hears of her and invites her to work as his personal scribe. She's granted access to his vast library and is able to read the Bible and learn about God, which was something she was unable to do where she came from. She gains more favor from the king, eventually earning his heart, but when a threat arises, promising to break them apart, they have no choice but to lean on God and fight together to save their kingdom. It was a powerful story meticulously woven together with themes of redemption, deliverance, forgiveness, and love, and it never failed to bring tears to Quinn's eyes. But at that moment, she was crying for another reason. Quinn pushed the book away from her, listening to the increased heaviness of rain and thunder outside. The wind pushed shards of water pellets against her window and howled within the darkened sky. Quinn closed her eyes, sucking in an audible breath. God, please give me an escape. I don't care where. She kept her eyes closed for a while longer, hoping for an answer, but was only met with the sound of the ongoing storm. Disappointment wrapped around her as she resumed her reading, but sleep was quick to catch her and wrap her in an inescapable blanket. Too drowsy to move or think, she lay on top of her book and fell into a deep rest. Quinn tossed and turned as she regained consciousness, squeezing her eyes closed at the bright light assaulting her vision from behind closed lids. She figured she had left her bedroom curtains open and felt around for her thick blanket. Her blind reaching halted at the feeling of dew-covered grass. Now that she mentioned it, it was awfully breezy for a bedroom, let alone hers. Birds called overhead, and trees swayed with the soft wind of what felt like an early summer morning. But that couldn't be right. It was currently fall, her eyebrows furrowed, and she was left with only one option. She opened her eyes and immediately closed them, figuring she was imagining the sight that greeted her. She rubbed her eyes for extra measure, but the scene before her didn't waver in the slightest. She was in a garden. A soft gasp escaped her at the foreign view. Trees surrounded the garden on 3 sides, the 4th side leading to a massive stone castle. Her mouth hung open, and she blinked several times. She touched her chest and slowly looked down. A fine, deep teal silk dress clung to her body, concealing her legs down to her ankles. The neckline swooped down just enough to allow airflow into the top of the dress, but still kept her modestly covered. Not trusting her eyes, her ears fastened to the sound of a nearby source of water. She followed it and was met with a small pond within the garden. She leaned over the water on wobbly legs, taking in her appearance. Not only was her dress fine, but her hair was also neatly styled. Her curly hair was secured into a thick braid, and it was littered with tiny white flowers. She took hold of the braid with wild eyes, studying it in astonishment. Unable to digest what was happening and where she was, her legs gave out, sending her on her backside and into the prickly grass once again. She had no time to ask herself unanswerable questions, as several footsteps approached from somewhere unseen. Men's voices traveled well into the garden way before anyone appeared, and Quinn tensed. A group of over 10 men clad in woolen brown pants and cream tunics entered the garden mere seconds later, all too engaged in their conversation to notice her. They laughed heartily at something one of the men said. One man towards the front noticed her first and stopped abruptly, causing the others to grunt in annoyance as they ran into his back. At his pointed gaze on her, they all stared, several looks passing over each of their faces. She swallowed thickly. At the disruption of their rather unified walk, a man emerged from the midst of them, dressed in slightly finer clothing. A path was made for his broad-shouldered and well-muscled body, and Quinn decided he was the leader. The man fixed intense, mossy green eyes on her, demanding her attention. He studied her face for a moment before his expression morphed into one of suspicion. "Who are you, and what business do you have in this garden?" he asked with a deep and authoritative voice. Quinn only stared at him, unable to form a sentence. One of the men cleared his throat beside the leader. "Perhaps she's daft, Captain Wenslet." Snickers sounded amongst the group. Quinn would have blushed out of embarrassment at the incorrect insult, but froze at the name she unmistakably heard. "Wenslet?" Her head slowly shook as she fixed her eyes on the grass. That couldn't be right. Captain Wenslet was a character from her favorite book. He was the trusted captain of King Henry's men and the king's most loyal friend. She glanced up at him with observing eyes. He had a strong, stubbled jaw of light hair, a slightly crooked nose, which was most likely broken and corrected one too many times, high and prominent cheekbones, full lips, thick light brown furrowed eyebrows that gave him the permanent appearance of a scowl, and unruly, dirty blonde curls. All that was left was his piercing green eyes, from his roguish looks, even to the light accent in his speech. Quinn couldn't believe her eyes once again. He looked exactly like the description of Christopher Wenslet, captain of Sognimia. In the back of her mind, part of her recalled having seen this face somewhere in a neglected memory, but she pushed it away. Certain she must have bumped her head and was dreaming. She slammed her eyes shut, expecting to wake up in her apartment, but was only met with the sight of the garden and the eyes of many men fixated on her. "Can you speak?" The Christopher Wenslet look-alike scowled at her, not caring to hide his impatience. If she were somehow encountering this character, his off-putting attitude further convinced her. Not wanting to frustrate him more, she nodded. "I can." His expression didn't change. "What business have you in this place?" Her eyebrows pinched together and she shook her head. "I'm not sure. I just woke up here." The man from earlier chipped in once again. "I told you, she's addled." The group laughed more boldly this time, and the captain raised a hand to silence them. He didn't take his eyes off her. "Where are you from?" "Washington." The men exchanged confused stares, shrugging their ignorance. The captain wasn't so easily swayed. He took a step toward her, placing a hand on the hilt of his sword, upheld by the belt on his waist. She hadn't noticed it before. His expression darkened, and he repeated his question. "Where are you from?" Her annoyance was beginning to grow. "I told you, Washington." "I've never heard of this Washington. How am I to know it is not made up?" His skepticism only confused her further. Surely this was a joke. Fed up with this conversation, she stood, dusting off her dress. She tried to ignore the lecherous eyes of the group that raked over her form as she lifted her chin. "Look, I'm not sure what kind of sick prank this is, but I'm not laughing." She watched the captain's expression change, but disregarded it. "I mean, you almost got me with the whole get-up and castle thing, but do you seriously expect me to believe you're Christopher Wenslet? What's next? You're going to tell me there's a King Henry in that giant castle behind you?" She barked a laugh, approaching the now dumbstruck man. She took his face in her hands, squishing his cheeks together. His eyes widened as she unabashedly moved his face around, observing every inch of the handsome canvas. Her movements paused when she caught sight of something. "Wow, you even captured the scar he obtained from his battle against the evil Baron of Warnshire." She gaped in amazement, running a finger over the raised-heeled flesh, traveling from just below his temple to his prickly jaw. Now that she thought about it, the scar felt real, too real. Her heart dropped when she was met with a dark glare. He grabbed her wrist with a firm hold, lowering it from his face, but keeping her bound. His next words were gritted out. "How do you know my Christian name? And how did you know where I got my scar from?" Only a few people know that story. Quinn gulped, realizing her mistake. If this were somehow real, she'd just ruined all of her chances of leaving without a problem. She gave an awkward laugh and stammered, I... He released her hands, but just as quickly, two men grabbed hold of her arms and began dragging her away. She tried to fight against them, but they were too strong. As she was taken from the garden, she heard a distant command. "Lock her in the dungeon and don't let her out until I say so." Her heart sank as the men grunted out their answers, carrying her through a door, down a spiraled staircase, and into an old, dim, and musty dungeon. She had no time to react as she was shoved into a cell. The barred keeping cranked shut and locked shortly after. She rushed to it, gripping the bars for dear life. "You're making a mistake. I don't belong in here." Her frantic words fell on deaf ears as the men standing guard fell into casual conversation about the weather. She continued to voice her innocence until one of the guards groaned in irritation and banged against the bars. "Quiet in there. You'll be answering to the king. And let's hope he doesn't sentence you to the gallows." He mumbled the next part. "Then at least we won't have to hear your blubbering." They both let out deep laughs, clearly finding joy in her misery. With no other choice, Quinn huddled against the wall, finding a scratchy blanket to cover herself with. She shivered against the cold stone floor, wrapping it tighter around her body. On the inside, she questioned how she ended up in such a peculiar situation. Quinn startled awake as something slid towards her. She rubbed her eyes and stared down at the plate sitting a few inches from her feet. It contained crusty bread and some kind of dried meat. Too hungry to question anything, she ate, surprised at how content she felt afterward. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand as her energy returned, and she stood, preparing to call out to anyone who would listen. The sound of a door opening at the top of the staircase made her pause, and footsteps echoed in the dreary dungeon. She concluded only two people were coming, but it didn't lessen her apprehension. When the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, only one proceeded. The footstep halted completely. "What are you doing, Captain?" A smooth and regal voice questioned just to the side of her cell. She heard a scoff. "I'm not going any further, Your Majesty." The voice laughed, attempting to stifle it. "What's the matter? Are you scared?" There was a long pause. "Of course not." The footsteps resumed, and she came face to face with someone she only thought real in her imagination. It took everything in her not to gasp at his appearance. Toffee skin, cool blue eyes, and thick dark coils framing strong and noble facial features. He stood nearly as tall as Captain Wenslet, but carried an air that made him seem as tall as a giant. This had to be King Henry. He eyed her thoroughly, keeping an impassive expression. "What brings you to my kingdom?" When all she did was stare at him, he continued. "Surely not for trade, since my captain found you in my garden." She wanted to speak, but her words failed her greatly. The king's eyes narrowed, and he stood taller, not willing to give up his interrogation. "What is your name?" "Quinn," she stammered, swallowing hard. "Quinn Miller." His suspicion didn't lessen. "Quinn, I have never heard such a name. Where are you from?" Knowing she couldn't lie to him, she said, "Washington, Your Majesty." The same puzzled look she received earlier was etched onto his face as well. At this rate, she knew no one would believe her. The king placed a hand to his low-cut beard, searching her eyes in a way that unsettled her. She read of King Henry's God-given gift of discernment, and how it was nearly impossible to lie to him, but she never knew how unnerving it truly was. He continued to search her gaze for a few lingering moments before stepping back. He wordlessly turned to whom she assumed was Captain Wenslet, and raised one hand. "Give me the keys." There was a sound of bafflement that intermingled with her gasp, but the king wasn't swayed. He merely kept his hand raised. The keys were handed over, and he unlocked her cell, opening the cell entrance wide for her. "My apologies, Lady Miller. You may reside here until I can gather some men to escort you back to this Washington place you speak of." He gave her a gentle smile before turning to Captain Wenslet. "I want you to keep an eye on her until then." The captain openly bristled as they climbed the stairs, but didn't dare to argue. He gave her one dark look before grumbling at her to follow him. She thanked the king and left. Quinn gaped at the interior of the castle. From the high ceilings, the broad windows beckoning light in, and the grand number of servants bustling about, she wasn't sure what to do with herself. "Keep up," Captain Wensley said, rather harshly, picking up his pace. She was forced to lift her heavy skirts to remain a couple of paces behind him. They approached what she assumed was the living quarters, but Captain Wensley abruptly stopped, calling someone's name. A pudgy older woman scurried over to them, eyeing her with curious gray eyes. She smiled shortly after. "This is Lady Miller. King Henry wishes for her to stay here until she can be escorted home." His voice was laced with distrust, but he avoided her eyes. "Find her a bedchamber to stay in." The woman ignored his rough tone and patted his arm like she knew him for a long time. "Of course, Captain." He gave the woman a singular nod, as if he were ready to leave. He approached Quinn, his eyes boring into hers with a deep intensity. "Don't even think of trying anything underhanded. The king may be overly trusting, but I'm not. I'll have you back in that dungeon in the blink of an eye." He gave her one last look over his shoulder before disappearing the way they came. The moment Quinn was ushered into her room and the woman got her settled, the door closed behind her and she ran a hand through her hair. "I have to get out of here." A week passed, and Quinn was starting to lose hope. She hadn't woken up if she was sleeping, and she wasn't sure where she was to travel back home, if this place was real. But the longer she stayed, the more she was convinced it was real. As Alodia, the older woman who had stuck by her side since the day Quinn arrived, brushed her hair, preparing to plait it, she said, "Perhaps you should join the king to break his fast today." Quinn grimaced. For the whole week, she opted to stay in her room, including during meals, to plan her escape. But at the thought of running away, she tarried, not only because she had no way of knowing which direction Washington was, but mostly because she had eyes on her at all times, including Captain Wensley's. The gruff man didn't let a single day pass in which he didn't glare her down, daring her to try anything sketchy. She often returned the glare, but as of late, she was fresh out of fire and hope. Defeated, she turned to the older woman and smiled. "I suppose I should." Alodia patted her cheek endearingly, reminding Quinn of her grandma, and finished dressing her with impressive speed. Stepping back, Alodia offered to escort her to the dining hall, and Quinn eagerly accepted. They approached a skyscraping wooden door guarded by 2 men. When the men noticed her, they gave half nods that revealed their distrust. Before making way for her to pass through, they announced her presence to the king and closed the door behind her. The king sat at the head of a long table, looking pleasantly surprised to see her. She smiled at him, but it wilted when she focused on a brooding form sitting close to him. Captain Wensley. He didn't hide his distaste towards her, and she wasn't the most inconspicuous either. It was truly a shame for a man as alluring as himself to have such a stomach-turning attitude. Looking in between the two of them with an odd expression, the young king clapped his hands. "Lady Miller, perfect timing. Please sit." He gestured to a seat close by, which was unfortunately right across from Captain Sulky. She sat and was presented with a sweet drink. Thanking the servant before he left, Quinn took slow sips, hoping she didn't appear unmannered. Food was presented next. A steaming roasted bird was brought out on a platter, accompanied by roasted vegetables and herbs. The smell of it was mouth-watering, but she made sure to wait until everyone was served. Before anyone could move, the king said a prayer over the food, blessing it and the one who provided it. When the prayer ended, they dug in. They ate in silence, and it would have been more comfortable if not for the rather discourteous stare on her every move. She was tempted to return it, but thought better of the action, if only for the king's sake. "Lady Miller," King Henry said after wiping his mouth, "I have to apologize for how long it's taking to escort you home, but I've had the best of my men that travel more than not, try to locate Washington, and they've collectively said they have never heard of it. So that leads me to ask." He gave her a stern look, gluing her to her seat. "Where are you truly from?" It grew quiet as the ball fell in Quinn's court. She audibly swallowed the food in her mouth, her chest constricting. A cough escaped her, and she patted her chest a few times. "It is as I've said." She tried to sound as passive as possible, knowing that if she grew frustrated, they might grow more suspicious. "I am from Washington." "Did you not hear what he just said?" the captain growled, leaning forward in his chair. "There is no Washington, so either you tell the truth or I'll—" "Captain." The king's warning tone echoed in the large hall, successfully quieting Captain Wenslet. Keeping his focus on Quinn, he said, "Perhaps we missed it. I shall check again." Quinn nodded, despite knowing he'd never find it. If this place were real, and she was somehow in the kingdom of Sognimia, Washington didn't exist. And that scared her. Ignoring the glare Captain Wensley aimed at her, Quinn excused herself with a demure curtsy. Heart threatening to pound out of her chest, Quinn found her room and began to pray. Not only for clarity on how to get back home, but to do so quickly. Nearly a month had passed, but still, no avail. Despite wanting to go home, Quinn was growing accustomed to her stay in Sognimia. Everyone within the castle walls was beginning to trust her, except for Captain Wenslet. But she wasn't the most keen to be in his company either. She made it a habit to travel the castle walls, and sometimes, a few of the guards would escort her to the village. Today, she was all alone since Alodia had other duties to tend to, so she wandered into the king's garden, hoping for some peace and quiet, but was met with a rather unrequested scene. By a tree, Captain Wenslet lunged and struck the poor bark with a wooden sword in a well-practiced dance. Block, lunge, strike, disengage. It looked silly without an actual partner, but Quinn could imagine how amazing he was with a real opponent. She caught herself smiling and frowned. Figuring she'd better leave, a voice stopped her. "I can feel you standing there. Come out." Quinn looked up and saw Captain Wensley scowling at her. Embarrassed that she had been caught and annoyed at the authority in his gruff voice, she walked further into the garden with a scowl of her own. Crossing her arms, she said, "What's the matter? You couldn't get one of your men to train with you?" The insolent man merely looked her up and down before resuming his training. After a few minutes, he paused, as if annoyed by her presence. "Do you not have anything else to do? Perhaps knitting?" More offended at the jab at her social status, she scoffed. Granted, if she were truly from Sognimia, she'd be a peasant. But she had to play her role as Lady Miller. Lifting her chin and straightening her back, she said, "Perhaps I can show you how to actually use a sword. Your skills are rather lacking." She almost smiled in triumph when his jaw clenched and his expression darkened. Instead of speaking, he wordlessly handed her his wooden sword. It was heavier than expected, but she played it off with an arrogant grin, acutely aware of his scrutiny. When she didn't approach the tree, Captain Wensleet impatiently frowned. "Well, why spar with a tree when there's an opponent right in front of me? But then again, the tree might be more of a challenge." The captain snorted a haughty laugh. Running a hand through sweat-dampened curls, he eyed her almost considerably. At the last moment, he scoffed. "Don't tell me you're scared," she taunted. His green eyes narrowed in offense. "Do not humor me, Lady Miller, if that is even your name." When she didn't falter, he sighed, rolling his eyes. He wordlessly walked a few feet away, retrieving another wooden sword she hadn't noticed. When he returned, he dropped into a fighting stance, twirling the practice sword in his hands as if it were second nature. "Let us see what you can do." Quinn dropped into a similar stance, hoping her 5-year lessons in fencing would pay off. Captain Wensleet let her take the first strike, which worked in her favor. She feinted a strike from below, and he fell for it, allowing her to aim for his shoulder. She tapped firmly before stepping away, right in time to avoid a powerful swing aimed at her left arm. She read that Captain Wenslet was one to end fights quickly, ending his opponents with a powerful Oberhau. She'd just have to make sure he didn't get the chance. Quinn blocked, feinted, and parried until she was out of breath. She was impressed to find Captain Wensley slightly winded as well. although it was hard to tell through the stony look on his face. Clearly, he was just getting started. Hits becoming more powerful, Captain Wenslet stopped holding back. He relentlessly attacked, and Quinn's arms screamed in pain as she blocked each one. Growing tired, her blocks became weaker and weaker. But Captain Wenslet only grew stronger. Raising his arms above his head, Quinn knew he was about to perform his signature Oberhau. She mustered all of her strength to block it, not realizing it was a feint. Knocking Quinn's sword out of her hands, he grabbed hold of her arm and spun her until her back hit his chest. He held her arms to her sides with one of his arms before dragging his sword across her neck in a swift motion. "Dead," he mumbled in her ear before releasing her. Quinn stood as still as a statue, barely processing her rapidly beating heart and heated face. She snapped out of whatever state she was in when Captain Wenslet started to retreat. Still catching her breath, she breathlessly asked, "You're leaving?" He kept his back to her. "Am I supposed to stay?" At her stunned silence, he continued, "Training is over. You're not a terrible opponent, but I've had better." He started to leave again, but she stopped him. "I want a rematch." He spared her a look over his shoulder. "You're not worthy of a rematch." His words stung, but she refused to be cast aside. "I could have beaten you, but I thought you were going to do my deadly strike." He eyed her intensely, waiting for her to nod, but she stopped herself. He was testing her to see if she'd expose herself like last time. He still didn't trust her and was waiting for a moment to catch her in a lie. Instead, she sternly repeated herself, "I want a rematch." She was only given a scoff and an eye roll as he retreated. Frustrated, she picked up a small rock and chucked it at the back of his head. It found its mark, and she was greeted with an angry scowl. She readied herself as he stormed over to her, nearly seething. "You will not give up, will you?" he growled. Quinn merely shook her head and stood up straighter. He searched her eyes for a long moment. Golden specks littered his green irises like stars in a cloudless midnight sky, captivating her more than she could admit. Finally, Captain Wenslet sighed and looked away from her, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Pick up your sword." She concealed a smile and followed his instructions. In no time, they were training once again, wooden swords noisily clacking against one another under the force of their hits. Adrenaline rushing, Quinn couldn't deny the enjoyment she felt while training. And Captain Wenslet wasn't frowning, which was probably good. The fight must have been carrying on for too long since, when Quinn wasn't paying attention, Captain Wenslet swept out his leg and tripped her. She could have caught herself, but the rather heavy dress constricted her legs and sent her to the ground. Falling backwards, she landed on her backside, barely feeling anything due to the fabric of her dress. Then, something pressed into her chest, right where her heart was. "Dead," Captain Wenslet repeated for the second time that day. If Quinn wasn't hallucinating, she'd have thought she caught him smiling. He further surprised her by reaching out his large hand to help her up. Knowing it would take her a minute to stand otherwise, she grabbed his hand, yelping when he yanked a little too hard and sent her flying face first into his thin, sweat-soaked tunic. She pulled back a fraction to scold him, but faltered at the curious look in his eyes. Captivated, she found herself unable to look away. Her breath caught in her throat when his stares scanned her entire face, before settling on her mouth. Heart pounding, she felt her eyes flutter closed when her hand tightened in his grip, and he pulled her closer with an arm around her waist. They tensed at the sound of a deep voice a short distance away, calling for Captain Wenslet. They only had a few seconds to separate before one of the guards came rushing in, saying something Quinn didn't care to hear. She was still caught up in what had just happened. Before she could blink, both men were leaving the garden, and she was alone. That's when guilt rushed in. Not because she almost kissed a man she had just met and barely tolerated, but because she was in a relationship with Beck.